Hello, and welcome to our video tutorial on core versus corridor layering. In this video, we will talk about the methods and techniques to differentiate and how to show these two layers. We will accomplish this by asking ourselves questions and using our available resources to determine the space classification of rooms and areas. Core rooms are easier to determine because while the team scans the building, one person notates all the rooms that service the building. They are constantly making notes about rooms and tenants. This is why checking Asana before starting a project and also reviewing the building after is so important. Any room that is labeled on the PDF should be showed on our drawings. We don't always have to label it exactly as it is shown on the PDF, so pay close attention to the label legend that is also placed in the conversation section. To learn more about labeling, see our video on core room labels versus tenant labels. But what happens if you come across rooms that are not labeled on the PDF or there is no PDF? You can find out if it is a core room a few different ways. While going through the photos, you may come across rooms like these. The easiest way is by asking yourself the following question: who uses this room? The answer will give you a hint as to what layer you should put it on. If everyone in the building or the floor can use it, it will definitely be a core room and should have a label. If a member of the facilities team, an engineer, security guard, or cleaning crew needs access to it, it will also be a core room. Finally, if the room services the entire building or floor, it will also be a core room. Corridors can be a bit more difficult to determine, as you will see in the examples later in the video. This corridor is quite straightforward and simple to determine. It wraps all the way around the core rooms in the center of the building. It extends to all service rooms and all tenant spaces. It provides access to all necessary parts of the building. Anything that lies outside the corridor is tenant space. A building engineer will not have to go through tenant space to access any service room in this example. However, in the next few examples, you will see corridors that are more difficult to determine, and some service rooms will only be accessible from tenant space. These buildings are not usually office buildings, but more in line with retail or industrial building types. Here's another example of an office-type building. However, the way it was built and intended was to be two separate tenants to occupy each side. Therefore, the only real corridor will exist in the main lobby area. However, during the review process, a judgment call was made to also include this area as corridor. This is because this side of the building could be split up into multiple tenants with the existing construction. Since corridors can be tricky and depend on the layout of the building, always use your best judgment to determine corridor layering. Here's an example of a building that does not fit the office type scenario. There is no clear corridor inside the building. This is because access to each suite is from the outside. This is more in line with an industrial or retail type building. In this situation, each tenant has their own private service rooms. This would include restrooms, electrical, and telephone rooms. These types of building are set up to be more independent than an office building where tenants share the benefits of service rooms. In this industrial building, there is also no real corridor. However, there are still areas we will show on the corridor layer. We will want to show the egress corridors as they serve the entire building. We will also want to make sure all the main entrances are shown on this layer. This is because this is a single tenant building. With its current construction, it could not easily be split up into multiple tenants. There would have to be additional construction to make it more of a multi-tenant building. Adding corridors in the highlighted areas would make this more of a multi-tenant building. However, there would still need to be more alterations to make it truly handle multiple occupants. But since we are representing the building as is, we are only going to show current construction conditions. This area is an exception because it is not a main entrance or egress corridor. It is more of a service entrance. It does not provide access directly to multiple tenants. If this building was split up into multiple tenants, this area would give the building engineers access to their office and the service elevator, so this area will be classified as building service. Our last example is another single occupant industrial type building. Are you starting to notice a pattern yet? These are the types of buildings where you will most likely run into corridor classification issues. Office buildings should always be fairly straightforward. Not to say there can't be issues with those types, but usually office buildings are built in a way where their corridors consistently provide access to and egress from service rooms and tenant areas. This building is one of the most difficult situations we have ever had to decide the corridor layouts on. Several different corridor options were considered when reviewing this building, and it was finally decided to show them like this. We chose this layout for a few reasons. The first being because the corridor accesses each major entrance and passes through the courtyard. The second reason is we decided to add in this lower corridor. This is so the restroom corridor wouldn't end openly in tenant space. This building is so large that it could easily have up to 18 tenants or more. We wanted to show a corridor layout that could handle multiple tenants. It isn't really our job to make up situations though. We are merely trying to get a best fit picture for the building in its current condition. If there were specific directives from the client, we would have them shown in Asana. It is also possible for the client to come back with revisions. Trying to figure out the best corridor layout shouldn't take hours. Sometimes, the best layout is figured out after the building has been fully drafted and you can see the paths from each of the main areas. To summarize, core rooms should always be labeled and are easily found on the PDF made by the scanning team. Office corridors are more straightforward and will always access stairs, elevators, restrooms, and service rooms. Industrial and retail buildings may or may not have corridors, but will more depend on their layout. Main lobbies, elevator lobbies, and building entrances should be shown on the corridor layer. Finally, use your best judgment when deciding corridor layouts. Sometimes it is easier to decide after drafting all the walls on the floor. This concludes our video tutorial on core versus corridor layering. Thanks for watching, and I hope you've learned something.